Okay. In the last lecture, we have been talking about the World Heritage Sites, and we spoke about the various criteria. Criteria we have not talked about, we actually talked about the process, and in that course of lecture, we also discuss about that when a particular site is inscribed as a World Heritage Site, it also gives us a responsibility to the state party. So, we will talk about that, we will start from there. You remember that we talked about that there are definitely certain benefits, tourism and cooperation, other things, and more visibility internationally, but there is also an added responsibility to the state party when a site is inscribed as a World Heritage Site. And as in the last lecture also I showed that at the moment there are 54 properties which are those red dots which are the put under the sites which are in danger. What does that mean is actually that UNESCO puts them as a danger, and if the state party does not take proper action, then ultimately after a few years it will be delisted and it will no longer be a listed property. And some state parties do take it seriously and take it as a matter of prestige and pride, some do not take it. So, there are different cases, we will discuss some of the case, but let us see that what are these, and I told you that this is a list, it continues, you can always see that which are the those red dots and which are the properties and what is the reason. You can go to the each and every site and find out on your own that what is the reason that why they are listed as the danger property. That will give you an understanding of the management issues and the responsibility about the World Heritage Site. I will talk about the very recent one, that in 2017 when that Krakow in Poland that UNESCO met, the World Heritage Committee has inscribed the historic center of Vienna on the list of World Heritage in danger due to high rise projects in the middle of the Austrian capital. Is the entire old city core of Vienna, which is declared as a World Heritage Site, and which actually, and what did it say? It says that in its decision, the committee regrets that the Vienna Ice Skating Club Intercontinental Hotel projects fails to comply fully with the previous committee decisions, notably concerning the height of the new construction, which will impact adversely to the outstanding universal value or the OEV of the site. So, this you can see that this is what is the Vienna, and this is also in winter, this is actually a skating very internationally known skating, a lot of tourists come there, and because of that there was a proposal or a project of a hotel, international hotel, which was violating the height of that. So, let us see what was that. As I say that it was that historic center of Vienna, and this is actually the hotel which was which actually came up. And so this is the hotel. So, what we can see here that in that historic center sort of these high rise structures came up, which is actually more than the height of this historic center. So, it is actually violating the historic norms. This is actually the problem, this was not the problem was actually this height which came up, and this actually there was a lot of protest when it was coming up. If you can go to the site, you will see that what was the stakeholders viewpoint, and actually the hotel body, the body which are the representatives of the hotels in Vienna, they actually wanted that high rise because of the increased demand for the more spaces in there. And they said that making an high rise hotel actually in no way will reduce the tourism or the tourist influx in the Vienna that area, and it is required, and so they actually went ahead with the international multi-story project, which actually violated the norms for the height. So, this is something which we will see more and more. These issues will come up later on, and this is one of the very recent example. It has not been delisted yet, but it is there. Now, when we are talking about so much about the outstanding universal value, because that is why it was put it in danger, that it violated the outstanding universal value or OUV, we must know more in detail that what really is this OUV and what really makes a site World Heritage Site. Now, as it says, the outstanding universal value is the basis devised in the World Heritage Convention to qualify any property as World Heritage or not. So, this is the basic qualifying criteria to be inscribed as a World Heritage Site. This refers to the property's exceptional qualities. This is something which is outstanding, exceptional, which is nothing there, unique value, exceptional qualities that are unparalleled in the world and make it deemed worthy of World Heritage status. So, this is actually, one must understand that what is that OAV? Why in Vienna that making an high rise structure in the city center? They didn't demolish any historic structure, they just made some high rise structure. So, how that interfere with the outstanding unit? So, one has to go back to the outstanding universal value or OUV of that property or that area for which it was inscribed, and to see that whether it really was violating that. And this is very important factor. Now, as per the operational guidelines, which are very important and which also you can find it in the site, the OAV is defined as the cultural and or national significance. We talked a lot about value earlier. So, we are talking about this now, which is so exceptional, as to transcend the national boundaries and to be of common interest, importance for the present and future generations of all humanity. So, this is something very important, that it actually is beyond the national boundary. It is something which is important and significant for the entire human that community as a whole, and that is what makes is OUV. So, this OUV is very important to understand, and when we are talking about so varied types of heritage and all over the world. Now, this operational guidelines is a very important document which actually gives a lot of discussion, documents, guidelines that how to do that. So, operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention 72, under which this World Heritage listing is done, as the name suggests, aims to operationalize and implement the World Heritage Convention and lays down the procedures. So, it is very important for working for the World Heritage Sites nomination. So, what it does? Procedures for the inscription of properties on the World Heritage List and the list of World Heritage in danger. So, it talks about both, that which should be put into inscribed and which should be put as a danger, what is its violating, the protection and the conservation of World Heritage Sites or properties, the granting of international assistance under the World Heritage Fund. So, yes, there is a fund, and under there are certain conditions under which the granting of that fund and international assistance can be offered to a particular site. So, there are certain guidelines for that, and the mobilization of national and international support in favor of the convention. So, these are very important because it clearly gives a guidelines for all this, for the assistance, the protection, that which will be inscribed, what will be in danger, and in under what condition, which condition the assistance can be given. So, these are very quite clear guidelines. They are not rules as such, but the guidelines are important. The operational guideline, as I also mentioned, that if you see the history of the how the World Heritage Site status and inscription is evolved, it is not a static one. What was there in 1972 and what is there today is there is a lot of change. So, it is a very dynamic process which a lot of these members see depending on the need of the time and the challenges which are being faced. So, they are periodically revised to reflect the World Heritage Committee's decision and changing trends in the heritage conservation. So, though we are talking about heritage of a past, we are talking about something which should be preserved, but then also we must understand that the entire process is quite a dynamic one, and it also changes according to the challenges. Now, as I said you that there are not only one categories of property, there are various categories of properties, and as we will see more and more, the different categories are also emerging and conventions are also getting changed, because each and every country, each and every culture has a different types of heritage sites. So, let us see what are the categories. So, broadly in 1972 convention, it identified two categories. One is the cultural properties which are man-made, and another one are the very broadened, which comes under the cultural landscape, historic cities and villages, cultural routes and historic canals. So, these all comes under these cultural properties broadly. So, it is quite vast, quite broad in its scope. The other broad subcategory is the natural properties. So, cultural properties and the natural properties. The cultural properties, as I told you, man-made, but under which there can be cities, villages, landscape, canals, routes, a lot of things can be done. Silk route is a very important part of that, which is international heritage, which a lot of countries are involved, nations are involved, including India. Natural properties are also there. Now, there is also a third type of property which was adopted by the Heritage Committee, which is called the mixed cultural and natural. You remember we talked about that half green and half yellow. So, which is a mixed property, which can be a cultural natural by many nation, many culture, which do not have a discretion or so much of clear difference between the culture and the nature. Even in India, if you see a lot of properties where natural and the cultural, they are all mixed together. So, they can't be really clearly made into different categories. So, they are now talking about the mixed properties. Such properties which are usually large area and satisfy a part of the whole of the definition of both cultural and natural properties. So, this is the third category, which sometimes is a huge area. We will see some of the example, and you can also search and see that what type of properties these are. Now, let us talk about the types of cultural property, and mostly I have taken the reference from the lectures I have mentioned, and we talked about here mostly in the Indian scenario, and later on we can also refer to some of the international one. So, let us see. So, first category is the monument. Taj Mahal is a very good example of that, which are architectural works of monumental sculpture and painting. It can be a very huge structure, it can be a small also. Elements or structures of an archaeological nature, inscriptions. You remember that Udagiri, we talked about the inscription, cave dwellings and combination of features which are of outstanding universal value from the point of view of history, art and science. So, again also it is not always history, it is also art. We will see some of the examples concerning that. So, Taj Mahal is a very good example, which is comes under the category of the monuments. The second one is the group of buildings. Groups of separate or connected buildings, which because of their architecture, their homogeneity or their place in the landscape are of outstanding universal value from the point of view of history, art or science. For example, the Goas, the churches and convents of Goa, which are quite a few of them, they are in Goa, but scattered over different areas, they form this group. So, this is a group of the buildings, they come under the second category. Then there can be the sites also. It does not mean always there will be the built up structures like monuments and other. These sites are works of man, because it is under the cultural category. Works of man or combined works of nature and man, and areas including archaeological sites which are of outstanding universal value from the historical, aesthetic, ethnological or anthropological point of view. For example, the Champanir, which is a very important, there is a hill, the size, the nature, and it is a World Heritage Sites. and which that is known as the Champani Avadkat Archaeological Park, because it has many of the archaeological sites in addition to some of the bit-up structure and the natural sites. So, this comes under the third category, which is the sites, and these broadly make up the cultural properties. But there are also another category, which is the spatial cultural properties. The definition of cultural heritage has been broadened, because as I told you, it is a very evolving concept and it has been happening depending on the challenges, depending on the new inscriptions or the new submission of the new types of heritage properties. The definition has been broadened over the time to include any property with built heritage component, including its natural setting if it possesses OUV. This includes the historic towns and cities, the historic canals, which is very important, again very interesting. There is one very good example in Canada. The cultural routes, including the religious and the trade routes. I mentioned the Silk Route. There are other different routes are also happening. People are talking about and started documenting an inscription locally or internationally. And the cultural landscape. This cultural landscape is a very important concept which one should understand. I just briefly mentioned in one of my last lecture. Cultural landscape are manifest as tangible expression of the significant interaction between the man and nature. This is what is important, is not only the built, man-made built or the nature, where this interaction between this and manifestation of the interaction between the man and the nature, where the rice terraces of Philippines, which are now as a World Heritage Site, that how there traditionally people have worked on the nature for a certain occupation and the cultivation, a particular type of cultivation. So, this is what is called the cultural landscape. And there is also a lot of tradition, intangible beliefs, practices are also associated with that. This is an important type or category of spatial cultural properties which is emerging. Now, so far Indian focus has been mostly on the monuments and archaeological sites. We have seen the ASI and the State Archaeology Department. We are yet to tap the vast wealth of heritage represented by our historic cities, towns, villages and cultural landscape. India has an immense very rich heritage things which are just not these monuments, but it is the entire cities, towns, historic cores which are living entity, including with its biological, and they are also a part of the sustainable ethos which were there traditionally and of varied types, India being such an important country, and this we are gradually trying to understand that, and there are different committees of economist, local economist chapters and other bodies which are started working on that this cultural landscape, and we really there is no end to it, that they are so interesting, that interface of the man and nature. The World Heritage Convention concerns primarily with the tangible built heritage resources and refers to the intangible heritage. While talking to the cultural landscape, I did mention that there are lots of intangible heritage like beliefs, practice, rituals, dance form, language, there are varied types of that, but World Heritage Convention primarily talks about the tangible heritage, not so much of the intangible heritage until and unless it is a part of the cultural landscape, like language, performing arts, only if they contribute directly to the OAV of the built heritage or are components of a cultural landscape, then World Heritage Convention relates to that. Otherwise, there is a separate UNESCO convention which we will also touch later on, that which is the intangible heritage and a documentation that, and that is the Convention for Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage 2003. Do you know what is the recent one in that inscription? Kumbhamala this year has been inscribed under that convention, and we will talk about that separately, that how this also makes a separate convention, and there is a lot of awareness programs, movements which are going on that. But as I told you that the World Heritage Convention, which talks about the cultural property, if the intangible heritage has a direct link up with that built heritage or man-made heritage, then that becomes a part of that. And there are many World Heritage sites in India and abroad where intangible heritage is an integral to the cultural heritage. It cannot separate that, but there again, as I say, there is a different list. But as I talked about the cultural properties, there is also the natural properties. For example, the natural features which are consisting of physical and biological formations or group of such formations which are of outstanding universal value from the aesthetic or scientific point of view. A very good example is the Grand Canyon of USA, which is a biological formation on the physical, which is the nature's contribution, and it is also one of the very unique type of natural heritage. The second category comes the geological or physiographical formations and precisely delineated areas which constitute the habitat of threatened species of animals and plants of outstanding universal value from the point of view of science or conservation. Kaziranga Wildlife Sanctuary in India is that where the rhinos are a species which are being protected. So, that is again comes under this second category. There is a third category of these natural properties types, which is the natural sites or precisely delineated natural areas of outstanding universal value from the point of view of science, conservation or natural beauty. The Western Ghats in India is one such area. But again as you can see that while I was mentioning, the delineation is a very important part, and sometimes later we will talk about how scientifically objectively this delineation can be done. We will talk about Shantiniketan Khoi area, that how the delineation is a part of the process and it has to be done very well, and that because it has got also a statutory significance. So, these are the types of the natural properties. So, we have talked about the categories of the cultural properties and the types of the natural properties. Now, this is a very interesting, if you take the operational guidelines of UNESCO, you will see that this thing, and this is very interesting because I have been talking about so many categories. One must understand that what are these categories which is important there. So, you can see that here we see that there is a natural properties. Okay, so this is the natural properties, and then there are the cultural properties. I have talked about that, but somewhere they sort of overlap, and that is where we are seeing this mixed properties. But within that also there is a certain area where we are seeing this cultural landscape. Cultural landscape has the cultural properties, is the mixed properties. So, it has also the natural properties, but it is also something different. How it is different is the cultural landscape are inscribed under the cultural criteria representing the combined works of nature and man. Cultural landscape also can be the mixed site. They are identified as cultural landscape under cultural criteria and the natural criteria. So, you can see that this, if you can just sort of try to understand that, you will see that there are a lot of overlapping also happens, and one has to very clearly understand that what are these criteria, significance and value, and under which category it can come. So, this is an important part of this thing. So, one of the example is the example of mixed property, the Kanchenjunga National Park, and which is one of the World Heritage sites. So, as you can see that I do not know whether you know that, because it has nobody can sort of go for mountaineering on the Kanchenjunga, because it has got a spiritual value for the local community, and and this is a lot of cultural, as you can see, the dance forms and others which are there. There are a lot of community, their beliefs and values, the spiritual value, and how they revere Kanchenjunga, not only the aesthetic value for the community. This all makes up this as a mixed property. In addition to that, the different species, the floras and faunas, the people, their ritual, the beliefs, their dance form, traditional forms, and all these makes up the mixed property, why it has been ascribed as the World Heritage Site. So, it is interesting if you can go and find out that under what are the criteria for which has been inscribed. Now, so we have talked about the categories, we have talked about the outstanding universal value, but one must try to understand, and this is again a sort of a framework which is given by the World Heritage Site Convention and the operational guidelines. You can see that there are three pillars of this outstanding universal value. So, what are these pillars? The pillars are actually, as you can see, that the first is that it has to meet this criteria. The property meets one or more heritage criteria. Even one meeting one of the criteria is enough to be inscribed as a World Heritage Site. Sometimes there may be more than one, but even in one criteria is more than enough. So, this is one of the pillar for outstanding universal value, but this is not enough. I have not discussed with the criteria that we will discuss in our next lecture, but this criteria is very important. We just broadly said cultural and natural, but there are other condition also. The property meets the condition of integrity and authenticity if it is relevant. We have been touching on this, mentioning somewhere authenticity, integrity. So, we must also try to understand that what is that condition of integrity and authenticity if it is relevant, what it means. So, this is the second pillar of the inscription and the outstanding universal value. But there is a third pillar also. The third pillar is this management issue, that it is not only enough to just being inscribed as the World Heritage Site, but this requirements for protection and management, which the reviewer goes and tries to see that how it is the state party, whether it is capable of all, it is the things which are very important. So, it takes about that. So, these are very three important pillars of outstanding universal value. Now, with this, I think we should take one by one and we should discuss the criteria of the World Heritage Sites, that what are the criteria. One will be very surprised that how many criteria, because so many types of heritage, so many nations and countries. So, how many criteria are there? You will be very surprised to know that there are only 10 criteria which are there and which tries to cover that. So, this is very challenging and they have to be very precise and very clear in their statement. So, as I told you that the outstanding heritage value, universal value is the heritage significance of high order. I have already mentioned, I think, that it goes beyond the national, regional and local importance, Taj Mahal, as I said. And as I told you that there are only 10 criteria which are set by UNESCO. Of that, 6 are under the cultural and the 4 on the natural, they are combined now. And as I told you that also they should fill the condition of the authenticity and integrity. These are absolutely important to understand this concept, but in our next lecture we will talk about the first pillar, that is the 10 criteria, the 6 cultural criteria and the 4 natural criteria with examples. Some of the examples mainly from India, but there can be more examples we can take up later on. And then we will talk about authenticity and integrity, and then we will talk about the management issue. So, this our next lecture we will talk about the first 10 criteria and the criteria for justification. Take up this criteria and try to understand that what is this justification. As I told you, even satisfying one criteria is more than enough to be inscribed as a World Heritage Site, but many times you will see that they also some sites or property can satisfy more than one criteria. So, that criteria and the criteria for justification will be the topic for the next lecture. Thank you.